My name is Merrill Shugoll, CEO of Merrill Research. I'm a 35-year veteran of the research and insights community and the host of our podcast, On the Mark. On the Mark is focusing on executives and thought leaders in the world, sharing their insights, strategy, and personal experiences. I promise this podcast will be filled with tough, pointed questions with real, insightful, and emotional answers. Today's guest is my good friend and president of Shugoll Research, Merrill. I love the name, Shugoll. Merrill, welcome to On the Mark podcast.
Thank you, Merrill, my namesake.
There you go.
Nice to speak with you.
Absolutely nice to speak with you. I know that the listeners here will have lots of takeaways from your perspective. So let's talk about it for a second. There you are. You're graduating American University a few moons ago, right? When you kicked open the business world, what did you think you were going to be doing?
Well, I thought I was going to be doing something with languages because I was a language major and I studied abroad. And then I ended up getting my first job with a consulting company for all the utilities in France. And so what I did was I worked with engineers in France with companies like Sopherail, which was the railroad company in France, and BCOM, which was the highway company of France. And so that's what I started out doing. And then lo and behold, somebody contacted me about a job in the research division of an ad agency. And it sounded fascinating and like great fun. So I changed jobs. And that's how I got started in the research business, working for a major communications firm here in D.C.
Wow, that's interesting. So you did that for what, about 8 or 9 years, right?
Yes, I worked for HJK&A, which was the largest and highest profile advertising agency in D.C. at the time. I worked for the grandfather of the advertising, a man by the name of Henry Kaufman, until he retired. And then, as I said, I worked in their research division, and that's how I got exposed to marketing research and learned from the bottom up.
Interesting. So did Henry retire in 84 and then you just decided to do something else, or?
Henry retired years before, but he was still in the office, and so it was fun. He was the dear man, and I worked for the CEO that purchased Kaufman from Henry. I worked for him, and interestingly enough, he started out as the research director at that company, and he really didn't know a whole lot about research. So lo and behold, he latched on or identified Joan Shugoll, my mother-in-law, and learned everything about research through Joan. And so when I came to work for the ad agency, he was really good friends with my mother-in-law. And so it was a really interesting story there. And then he became CEO of the agency, so he no longer did the research. And there was somebody he had appointed as research director who hired me.
Wow. So one of my favorite stories back in the day, in my first job, I worked for Marianne Schaefer. And I remember her coming over to me, and back in the day, you know, we had paper questionnaires and we had about 50 locations. And I remember her asking me, okay, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm counting out 100 questionnaires to 50 locations, and then I'm FedExing them and blah, blah, blah. And the whole process probably would have taken 3 hours. She looked at me, she goes, is this one of the stacks of 100 questionnaires? I said, as a matter of fact, it is. She went and got a scale, and she put the scale down and she weighed it. It weighed at that point, I don't know, 17 pounds. She goes, my dear, you're not sending 100 questionnaires. You're sending 17 pounds of paper. And it was I didn't realize for a few years in that British accent she said it, Merrill, and I didn't realize it for many years probably of what that meant to me. But it stuck with me because it always taught me that there's a better way to look at something. There's a better way to do something. There's a much more efficient way. There's a way to save time. There's a way to save money, right? And, by her teaching me that, it saved me, 2 hours of my life back. So I'm wondering, I'd never met Henry Kaufman, but do you have a funny or an interesting takeaway from Henry of something that he taught you decades ago that stuck with you?
Oh, yeah. I have many stories about Henry. What was really interesting is that my office was right across the hall from Henry Kaufman. And by this time, he was certainly a much older gentleman. And he would stop by my office when his secretary was out, like either she had called in sick or she wasn't available. And he would stop by my office and hand me this document, and he would say, Ms. Shugoll, is there any way that you could type this up for me? And I said to him, Henry, I adore you, but I don't type. So I'm afraid I can't help you with this assignment. And he looked at me with like this funny expression, and he said, you don't type? And I said, no, I really don't type. I'll go around the office and see if I can find somebody who could help you. So he said, oh, that's really nice of you, Ms. Shugoll. And so I went around the office, and I said to myself, well, I've got two choices. When the founding person of the company comes to me and asks me a question about whether I can type this paper up for him, do I learn to type so I could do it for him? Or do I find somebody who knows how to type who could do it for him? And I chose to do it the second way. And so one of the things that I didn't say no, obviously. I just said, I'll find somebody to do it. And so the learning experience for me was you can always get something done. Your first thought about, well, no, this can't be done, is never the right response. It's always, how can I get this done? And so I met his need, and then I decided, well, I probably better learn to type because it someday might come in handy. And he never asked me to type again, thank goodness, but I learned a valuable lesson that day, which is figure out a way to get it done and always put something in your back pocket so the next time somebody comes and asks you to do something, you could either do it yourself or find somebody who can do it for you. And I learned a lot.
That's great. No, I think it's amazing, right? That we both have takeaways, Merrill, from way early on in our career, from leaders, from people that we looked up to, that we respected, that were probably in a lot of ways mentors to us. I love that story. So it's back in the 80s, right? And you're at Henry Kaufman and Associates, and I'd like to know, because I'm not sure you've ever told me this story, but then you went and your mother-in-law said, hey, I've got this company over here. Why don't you join us? Is that kind of how it all happened?
So what happened was I was one of Joan's largest clients. When I fielded research in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, Joan was my go-to supplier. So I did a lot of work with her. And when I got to the point that I was at the agency after 9 years, and I was ready to move on for a variety of reasons, I was talking to my mother-in-law, and I said, I think I'm going to go out on my own. And she said, well, I'll be happy to back you, but really what I want you to think about is coming in with me and diversifying my business, because she was a data collection company, and she thought a way to grow would be if I came aboard and started providing design and analytical services. So I said, that sounds like a brilliant idea. So let's talk about it. And we talked about it, and we decided to move forward and go ahead. and launch Shugoll Research as a full-service research company. And that was when she was still working on her kitchen table when we did that.
So, kitchen table, recruiting, and actually, was there focus groups in the living room back then or no?
Actually, when she moved to D.C. from New York, she opened up her first facility. And the facility was in her apartment building. She used to travel from the 17th floor in her building down to the 5th floor. And that was where her focus facility was located.
Did it have a back room back then, or was it just a room?
No, it had a back room. And behind the back room was the kitchen. It was really kind of a neat setup. So we ran our focus groups. And of course, it was only one room back then, but yes, we did have a one-way mirror and a conference room. Of course, we didn't have a client lounge and those kinds of things because, that's not the way it was back in those days. We didn't have the bennies and the amenities that focus facilities today have. I would leave my office because I had an office. I would leave my office and, take whatever paperwork was sensitive with me or lock it up, and they would go into my office and have their little meeting. I would come back once their meeting was over.
You and I had the pleasure of working back in the day when it was the Market Research Association, when I had the pleasure and frankly the honor to being on your board where you were the president of the association. Can you talk about why is, the Insights Association or the MRA and CASRO you were involved with, and obviously your family is so involved with the arts, why is giving back and getting involved, why is that so important to you and your family?
Well, I have to tell you, Merrill, it is in our DNA. As far as the industry or profession goes, my career in this profession has been so rewarding, I can't even begin to tell you. It's like I fell into this, and it's my passion. It has always been my passion from day one because I'm a people person. And to get to sit around a table or one-on-one with somebody and listen to their stories and listen to their needs and their wants and their concerns means everything to me, so that I can understand what products, services, and solutions can be developed to better meet their needs. It's very rewarding for me. So I sort of found myself in this profession. And because of that, I felt I needed to give back, that I needed to make sure that I took my skills and my passion and gave back to the community that had given me so much. And so that's why I volunteered with the MRA at the local level for many years, and then decided to run on the national level. And then the rest is history. I mean, once you do that, then you're sort of sucked in for years and years and years. And, I never minded. I loved the people I worked with at the MRA, and I thought it strengthened my leadership skills. And I got to work with a lot of my colleagues and friends. So for me, it was the greatest gift. It didn't feel like a burden in any way. It felt like a gift. And then with CASRO, that's an interesting story. As is the case for much of my life, my husband and I have very similar passions and interests. And so he was originally the CASRO person. He did CASRO, and I did MRA. And then when he finally moved off the board of CASRO, and I had finished my stint at MRA, Diane Bowers approached me and said, We'd really like a strong female small company representative on the CASRO board. Would you consider it? And I said, sure, I'll consider it. And so I joined the CASRO board. And that was a whole different experience for me, Merrill. It really was, because I was on the board with a lot of representatives from very, very large research companies, you know, from Ipsos and Kantar and Burke. You know, a lot of these companies function very differently than the small boutique kind of company. So I felt I had to speak up for the small companies, because really when you look at the industry, there are so many small companies represented, and their voices need to be heard.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And, you know, if you had to sum it up in 5 words, your leadership style, because when I think of leaders, Merrill, you're at the top of my list. Just you have so many great attributes. You have a nice way about yourself. You're an amazing communicator, really good motivator. But instead of my words, what would you use? What 4 or 5 words would you use to describe your leadership style?
I would say I'm empathetic. It's important for people to approach a problem themselves. And if they need my guidance, I'm more than happy to provide it. But I want them to problem solve themselves. So, and I make that very clear, that I'll mentor you, but you need to solve problems yourself. So I would say that's a big part of my leadership style. I won't do things for people. I ask them to do it for themselves, and then I'll give them feedback if needed. And then the other thing is, I do really like when people brainstorm new ideas, and if it's something that I think really can move us forward, I'm more than happy to put money and effort behind it. I mean, that's not 5 words. I would say I'm empathetic. I'm interested in having them problem solve as opposed to me telling them what to do. And I would say that I am supportive of change. I'm not afraid of change. I'm supportive of change. But I want them to innovate. It doesn't always have to come from us, you know, from me. It needs to come from the people in the trenches, because they're working every day and seeing the issues rise every day. And so I think they're as likely, if not more likely, to come up with solutions that will move the company forward. And so that's how I like to lead.
That's great. So switching gears a little bit, back in my first job, I had the chance to work, I mentioned earlier, Mary Ann Schaefer. What I didn't mention is Mary Ann Schaefer's husband was involved, Stephen, 2 sons, David and Rich, and then the daughter-in-law, Terry, was involved at all. And at times, I must admit, did I learn a lot? Yes. Did I feel like an outsider at times because my last name starts with a D and it doesn't begin with an S? Actually, like Schaefer and like Shugoll, actually. And I felt like an outsider, and I felt like my voice wasn't heard all the time. So my question would be, you know, obviously your mother-in-law is involved in the business, your husband's involved in the business, he's CEO, you're president, your daughter's involved. How is that process on the decision-making process at Shugoll Research to make sure that people feel like they are involved, and even though their last name might not be the same as yours, that their voice is heard?
Well, it's a good question. We are a multi-generation, closely held company. The company was founded by Joan. She passed away 2 years ago, and it's a big hole for us. She was an inspiration for everyone. And then Mark and I have been really running the company pretty much since 1984. I mean, Mark joined 2 years later, so he joined in 1986. And what we did was we split the responsibilities up. So I decided to grow and manage our qualitative business. And Mark's background is in quantitative. He used to work for very large consulting companies doing longitudinal studies, so using quant data. And so he basically took our quant division and grew that part of our business. And then Joan at the time was still active, and so she managed our data collection business. And then a number of years later, we hired a gentleman by the name of Rick Seal. And I know, Merrill, you know Rick.
Yeah, I do. Good guy.
Yeah,
yep.
And he's an amazing guy. And so he's been with us, 27 years, something like that. A number of years ago, I'm not sure how many now, maybe 7 years ago, we decided that we were going to sell stock to a non-family member, and it was Rick. I mean, he became so important to us that we wanted him to be a stockholder. And so it was the first time, and we actually didn't sell it to him, we gifted it to him. And so we gifted him stock so that he would stay with us and continue to run the data collection division as Jones was stepping back. And so it was a fabulous decision for us because he moved that business forward, and he's an integral part. And it has a very high level of management decision-making with our company. I don't do anything without consulting Rick.
Right, which is interesting because if you think about when it's 1984 and you were president of the Research Bureau and you asked for some equity, and the president of Henry Kaufman at the time said, no, you left. It's funny that you had that decision to make, Merrill. I don't know if you ever realized it, but you made that a different decision 30 plus years later with Rick Seal, right?
It was a great decision, I think, for us.
Right, yeah.
Because, as far as I'm concerned, he's really good at what he does, and he's in large part a reason why our data collection division has thrived. And together, we've built a magnificent facility for our clients to enjoy. To be honest, Merrill, I don't have to worry about my data collection division. He consults me. We see each other almost daily, except for when I'm on the road. And if I'm not there, we talk to each other. And he's a member of the family, even though his last name isn't Shugoll. And he has the best interest of Shugoll Research at heart. And I've never doubted that for one day.
That's great. That's great.
And then when our older daughter decided to join Shugoll Research, we made her pay her dues first. I never wanted her to come in as the owner's daughter. I wanted her to come in on her own merits. So she went to a really good undergrad school and got a really good degree, and then went to Chicago and worked for Ipsos ASI for 4 years to get experience in the business, and then went on for her MBA at Michigan, and then went and worked on the client side in a major packaged goods company in Chicago, and then finally said to me after doing that for a while, I'm ready to come in, company mom. Is there a position available for me? And at the time, we were really busy and we needed the help. And I said, yes, you did everything I asked you to do. So please come in and join us. And that was, I think it's almost 11 years now. And so she's been with us 11 years. And she did fabulous things for our reports. Coming from a big research company and coming from working on the client side was a really valuable set of skills to bring into our company. And so that was wonderful. And then most recently, about 2 years ago, our younger daughter joined, and she's working on the customer service side of our business because that's what her experience is. She used to work in retail in the customer service area, and so that's what Shugoll Research is really well known for. When clients walk in the door, that their needs are met. And so we put her in the customer service area of our company, and she's doing really well. So I'm happy to say that that's working out great.
That's great. Merrill, as always, amazing job. Lots of takeaways for the listener. Thanks again for listening to Merrill Shugoll. This is the On the Mark podcast. My name is Merrill Dubrow, and have a great day.
Thank you, Merrill. I appreciate the opportunity.